Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Incubator Podcast. I'm your co-host, Darren Boyd.
And this is Sabir Sran. Very excited to have everyone today. We are joined by Access Security, a security service edge platform known by Atmos. And from Access Security, we have Jay Tilson as well as John Spiegel, both of them directors of security at Access Security. And thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us today. Pleasure to have you. A little bit about Access Security, for a little background here. Our understanding is that Access has had phenomenal growth. One of the largest kind of fundraisers. You guys have been valued at over 100 million and with a Series C. So fast growing platform, phenomenal growth, and are the next generation evolution in the SSE space. So we're really excited to unpack what that means today for our audience. If you guys wouldn't mind, before we begin, giving us a little bit more about each of your respective backgrounds, and then we'll get started.
That sounds great. Jay, do you want to go first?
Okay, yeah. So I am Jay Tilson. I'm based in the UK. I've only been actually with Access for about 6 months now. I spent 25 plus years the other side of the fence. So this is kind of my first go at being on the dark side. I guess I spent 25 plus years doing roles like head of architecture, head of infrastructure, some very large manufacturing companies. I had the luxury of being able to live in multiple countries. I lived in Japan for a while, in Denmark, and a little bit of time in Italy. So literally just looked after everything on the wire. And I really ended up here at Access because I was looking at replacing a ZTNA 1.0 platform that I'd put in a number of years ago. And as I was digging deeper and deeper into kind of new technologies, looking for the refresh, I came across Access. Was so excited by the product and what it's doing in this space that actually ended up coming over and working here. So that's kind of how I ended up here.
Welcome to the dark side.
Thank you.
And John Spiegel, my background very similar to Jay. This is a new transition for me, being on the, if we're calling it the dark side now. I similarly 25 years of experience in the industry. My background primarily was been in networking, so went through the whole network progression from the 90s, CCNA, CCNP, all the Cisco acronyms there, and but got kind of bored of what networking was doing, because networking was kind of like the same thing all the time. It was routing packets and not a lot changed. And then I came across software-defined networking, so did some work with Nicira, which then became VMware. And then finally did a lot of work in the SD-WAN space. So was one of the pioneers out there with one of the first global networks based on SD-WAN. And had an opportunity to speak at many of the major conferences. So your VMworlds, Palo Alto, Ignite, Gartner conferences, and so on and so forth. And at a certain point after COVID, kind of changed my trajectory, my career due to some of the family reasons associated with it, made the switch over to Access Security. So very excited to be here.
No, that's wonderful. So Access, you're culling the complexity and excessive access of connectivity. We love that. We love what you're doing in this space. We welcome you to the show, of course. But hoping you can maybe start with a little bit of a primer. And what would be probably helpful to some of the folks listening to the podcast is, can you give a little bit of a taxonomy of what SASE is and where SSE fits in that, and what are some of the components? Because you had when you started, I think it was ZTNA, but you've added a lot of the SSE components. But maybe you can walk us through what are the relationships, and then probably more importantly, why is this so important today with the proliferation of cloud and microservices and some of how we handle supply chain and third parties?
Okay, so I can take that one. So yes, SSE is kind of one part of the SASE framework. So Gartner came out with SASE a while ago on the back of SD-WAN. So SD-WAN came out. There was talk about security and how do you embed security into the SD-WAN. So they came out with SASE. But then it kind of changed as the pandemic came along and people moved out of offices. That kind of reliance on that SD-WAN area kind of faded away. So Gartner then broke it up. So you've got kind of the left-hand side, which is kind of your connectivity side, your delivery side. And then you've got the right-hand side, which they called SSE, which is more your security stuff. So ZTNA, CASB, DLP, and all of these other acronyms that nobody really understands. Yes, Axis started off with ZTNA. So they started off primarily with agentless access. The founders went out and interviewed a bunch of CISOs and CIOs, and there was a hole in the market for having agentless access for things like third party and contractors. You don't want those people on your network, and you certainly find it difficult to put a client on their machine. So we started off with that. The pandemic then came along, and an agent was added to give more flexibility for those kind of people that need full access that were now at home. And then on the back of that, we've started to build on all those other parts of the SSE kind of taxonomy. Secure Web Gateway, CASB, DLP. It's approached in a very different way. We have tagging instead of segmentation. We're built on the cloud, so we work in GCP and Azure and AWS and things like that. We don't have our own data centers. And I don't want to list all the differentiators, but it's kind of that new version, that new technology. And some key use cases are still that third-party contractor access, that agentless access that people still need to get access to. But it truly is, it's a zero trust model. It's all about connecting user just to the application, not to the network. You don't put them on the network, you cut down that east-west traffic, ransomware, insider threat, all of that stuff. So it's just a new way of doing stuff. So, John, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I'll add a few bits here. It's really an exciting market in the transition that we're seeing just over the past few years. And the announcement of SASE by Gartner and that answering the question of how do you insert security into SD-WAN. I thought that was going to be the big piece. And then obviously the pandemic hit and how we worked changed. You know, I don't foresee us going back to the office like we were in 2019. People have gotten too used to it. They enjoy the convenience of, rolling down into your, wherever it may be, your kitchen table, your basement, your office. And there's a convenience to that. And as well for companies, there's an opportunity to gain a lot more talent that you wouldn't have been able to see in the past. You think about, where I live in Portland, Oregon. Previously, my career was kind of limited to the companies that were within the Portland market. If I wanted to work for somebody bigger, I would have to move, to be realistic about it. Today, I don't have to do that. I joined Axis as a remote employee, leveraging the technology. I've continued that, and I don't foresee myself having to move to wherever our headquarters will be. And the company will operate in that manner. It will be a distributed company, and that's the future. And that's really what excites me about Axis, is this transition and taking it beyond just remote access. I mean, that's just one use case. Long term, where I see the industry going is zero trust embedded into the campus, into the branch. That's where we're headed. And it's not just about, hey, we need to connect these remote workers in. It's about, how do I make my enterprise essentially, I'll use the marketing term, ZTNA everywhere. Mm-hmm. And that's where we're headed. And it's exciting to be on the forefront of this change.
Awesome. If I can maybe paraphrase a little bit of that back. So the first generation, if we may, included SASE, the SD-WAN, maybe the transport aspect of things, right? So next gen, or generation 2 here, is really about the SSE side of things, and ZTNA, CASB, DLP aspects, and things of that nature. Is that fair?
I don't know if that reflects it it's not a generational thing. I think it'll eventually be a choice. You're always going to need transport, and that's what the SD-WAN or the or the A in SASE really means. It's about access, and that is what Gartner's tied to it as SD-WAN. In the future, that could be, there was two at least startups that are announced in like the last 2 weeks that are network as a service. So basically what they do is they provide what an AT&T in the past would have, but they're not only just connecting your wide area network sites, they're connecting you to your cloud and potentially also your remote access users as well. I could see it as SD-WAN, it could be NAS. You need that connectivity.
For sure.
But I think the most important aspects for the future are really in that bucket that Jay outlined, is the security side of SASE, and that's where we play is the SSE marketplace.
Yeah, transport is essentially treating it more as transparent, meaning it's there. We'll focus on the security side, and based on that security focus, if I can go or hone in on this third-party access, right? We talked about third-party access, contractors, supply chain folks having access only limited to the applications that they just need. So does SSE start taking the place, and maybe we shouldn't even call it SSE, Access's platform is Atmos. So does Atmos take the place of what was traditionally governed by your identity access management platforms like PAM, where you had all your users, both your employees and third-party users all housed in? Is there an overlap there, or do both of them exist and one confirms everything else but then limits that access to that particular application? That was a point of confusion I wanted to, or at least for myself, to clarify.
So yeah, I think that's a really good question. So identity is one of those things that everyone kind of starts with, or generally starts with, when they start to go down this route.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's not the be all and end all, and you shouldn't stop with identity. I've seen people, and I've experienced with people putting in something like that and then stopping, but it's not. So we actually work hand in hand with multiple identity providers, Okta, Azure, etc. And that's how you build the policy. So you build the policy based on the identity, posture check-in, etc., etc., and then you give access. I think one of the key things with the third-party / contractor type access is the agentless, because historically, and certainly my experience is, if you've got a third party and a contractor, you don't usually own their device. They usually own their own device. And trying to put a client on that machine comes with problems. They're more than likely, those contractors or third parties, also working for other companies. They've probably got another client installed, another VPN client or other clients or firewalls. And if you try and put, like certainly my experience historically, you try and install, say, a Cisco or a Palo onto something that's already got something else, it's not going to work. So that's why the agentless part is really important. And actually, Access's agentless is very powerful, a lot more ports and protocols than many other people. So that's one of the things we bring. But yes, to go back to your question about identity, it sits hand in hand. It's not instead of, it's as well as.
So yeah, it's an additive, and I'll just add on here. What Access does is really what we call adaptive trust. So depending on the device, depending on the location, depending on the time of day, and what is being accessed, we can vary the level of security. So for instance, if you're let's call it a finance person, and you're in the office and you need access to the financials for the company, you've got maybe a quarterly announcement coming up very soon. If you're in the campus and you're using a trusted system, you get full access. Now, for instance, you shift from home and you're using your home computer, the system will identify that as a non-compliant or non-trusted device and not give you access. So you can build policies to that level and to that level of security. So we call it adaptive trust.
Yeah, I think that's so important. As someone that, I do a lot of consulting, and I've had everything from supplicants installed on my system. I've had VDI access. I've had laptops shipped to me. This is something that I think the world needs, and this is just one use case, as you said. And it starts to, I love the adaptive security element. I love the continuous enforcement, and I think the granularity there makes sense. And this is going to be hard to break into without going into all of your other products, because I think you do a lot of really cool things. But if we look at security beyond just those pieces, because we're just talking that one use case, you're also, with your agent, I can do device posture. With your CASB, I can do, let's call it SSPM, so SaaS security posture management. I can also get into degrees of data security posture management with your leakage prevention. So can you talk to us just in terms of Atmos? How are you viewing security across all of these different pieces? And what does that bring in terms of business agility to the organizations embracing it?
I think the key thing that we differentiate is everything's in one place, one portal, one set of policy. And certainly in the past, you go out and buy a product, and when you get it installed, you find out it's multiple things underneath and they don't talk too well together. So myself and John also run the SSE forum, and this is a question we asked on the SSE forum. So most of the time, most people look at ZTNA and then the secure web gateway. Then you add on things like CASB and DLP. The way we've approached things is ZTNA and the secure web gateway are in the same product, but CASB and those other elements are just kind of elements of the secure web gateway. They're not in themselves treated differently. They're just part of that kind of single entity. So we just see them as additional features instead of separate products. Because actually you want to control upload, download. You want to be able to see if it comes from an on-prem system to a cloud system. You want to be able to control if somebody downloads something from a corporate system, they're then not allowed to take that same thing and put it in their own private system, etc., etc. And those are just kind of standard things you'd expect now in your secure web gateway. We don't really even define them as separate elements. We talked about them generally as separate elements because that's what people know of them, and they have heard of a CASB or a DLP, but all of that functionality we see is just kind of one part of that product. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense. Maybe to build on that too, I love how that's constructed, by the way, because I think that's how we should consume it. If the categories exist for helping to explain, that makes a lot of sense. But I love the integration. There's one question I would have, which is, what is the scope? When we're talking about access, what is the scope of that access? We have users that we've talked about. We have networks. We have applications. But we also know that we have ephemerality. We have machine to machine. We have all sorts of other types of identities. When you talk about Atmos, I know some of the use cases we're talking about. What is the scope of access that we could potentially imagine using Atmos to address?
That's a great question. Right now, our focus is really on users or employees access as well as server-to-server traffic. OT is another. I mean, that is a whole new territory. We have not ventured into it yet, but it is something that is on a roadmap down the road. It probably will start mostly with devices that you would find in an office, a branch location, printers, some other OT devices. But eventually, if you think about a scenario like a hospital where you have multiple devices spread all across a hospital campus, how do you manage those? How do you maintain those? And you think about the network stacks on those devices. They're very primitive. Those need security as well. So I can see us venturing into that area long term, but right now, our focus is really on employee access, third-party access, and then server-to-server.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
I think it's worth pointing out that one of the fundamental things that Access concentrates on is growing the single product with more features. There's no intention of going out and acquiring other bits and trying to bolt them in and trying to make them look like they're part of the same product. It's all part of adding more features to that base product. Obviously, we talk to customers, we get customer feedback, we do our research, and we go out and we look in the industry and we see what use cases there are, and that's part of what me and John do, is have those discussions. But it's all about growing that feature set. It's already one single platform with one data lake, which gives us great visibility across everything we do. And as we move and add more and more features, we always think about the visibility element. What do we need to see from this feature? What do the CISOs need to see? What do your CIOs need to see? What do auditors need to see? What's going to be helpful for those IT teams? All of that is kind of in the forefront of our minds when we come up with the next feature, so that it can stay within that data lake and be easily accessible. And it's not always in the single entity, as in you don't dig real deep in the portal itself, because that would make it too complicated. But we have some great visibility in the single portal, but then you can output to a SIEM and you can get all the real kind of data underneath. So it all exists there. You can't display it all in one place.
And Jay points out a very critical factor, critical item around Atmos. This is a modern platform. It's built on containers. We're using cloud scale to deploy it across the globe. It's modern. It doesn't incur the technical debt that some of our competitors do, where it is hard for them to add more features, and when they do, there always is a workaround. For us, it's amazing, our development team and how quickly they can add a feature for a customer and do it in a very quick manner, in a clean manner, without these constant workarounds or extra screens. At the end of the day, the product is about simplicity. That's what I enjoy about delivering the product out to a customer, is see the joy in their eyes. We're like, hey, I don't have to go through 16 screens in order to apply a security rule to this particular device or employee. It's 2 clicks, and it's reflected there, as well as I want a policy that's going to both be enacted on an application that's within my data center, but also have a policy that if that data is moved to something like a Dropbox, we can block that. We can see it. It all can be in one policy and not multiple features, multiple platforms doing this, or siloed applications, siloed systems doing it. So there's a lot to be said about a modern approach.
You said a few things that kind of spark an interest. You have a great deal of complexity, but as you said, one of your selling features is this is a very simple thing to get started. It's a very simple thing to manage, and it's a universal element that can do all of these pieces. Those things are very hard to get right when done. They're naturally opposing. So when I was thinking back to the statement around adaptive controls or adaptive authentication or adaptive, I forget how we worded it, I was thinking to myself, oh, that's interesting. Are you actually building this to almost have an accretive view where, hey, it's not just that you're on an uncontrolled device, but if I add that to the fact that you are now sitting in a Starbucks, and if I add that to the fact that it's midnight, and if I add that to the fact that you've never done that before, do you tip a scale and all of a sudden, hey, you've surpassed a threshold? Or when we're defining these policies, is it, look, there's a little bit of complexity. You have to define these right. The simplicity is how we enact those. How does that reconcile? Because it's a really cool idea that you can do all these things and then still say that this is a very easy thing to manage. How are we doing some of this? If you could maybe explain a little bit of it.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, that's a great question. So one of the things that certainly we get from customers is the policy itself is really easy to understand. So if you're familiar with setting up firewalls, it was impossible to read firewall rules unless you were the person that wrote them. You could try and figure them out, but most of the time they just get left for like tens of years because the person that wrote them is no longer there and they made no sense, and you didn't dare delete it because you broke something. Our policies are really simple to read. Like literally anybody can sit down and they're very descriptive. They will say person A or group pass in these postures can get access to these things, and these things can be SaaS, cloud, on-prem, wherever they may be. But they do stack up. So you can say John's allowed in from home on these hours of the day on a machine that's got an agent. If he comes in without an agent, he gets different access. And if he's got an agent, and if he's trying to come in, say, after a certain time at night, he's not allowed in. Do we do it in such a way that it's clever enough to note that John's logging in now from Korea? If Korea's not part of the block, then he would be allowed in. But that is certainly something we are talking about. But those tools that do that kind of stuff are very complex, that kind of user analytics stuff. But it's definitely something we are discussing.
Yeah, okay.
John, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I was also going to add, and Jay pointed this out earlier, the single data lake that we are able to leverage. You're going to be able very soon to be able to go into that data lake and gain the visibility, unlike in the past that I've been able to do. So if you wanted to have somebody hunt and peck and say, hey, what did Jay do today, and where did he go, and where did he log into, and be able to stream all that metadata, we're going to be able to have that real soon here, and that to me is a game changer for a lot of us, because if you think about a lot of our competitors, it's a data lake for their SD-WAN products, a data lake for their CASB, a data lake, so on and so forth. They don't all come together, whereas Access is a single platform and it is not a portfolio of products.
So if I can go a little bit further on the policy creation and kind of play a scenario out maybe, or perhaps you can help me narrate this. So if we are trying to manage third-party access, and then you have your normal employee base that's coming, how many policies are there? And while the platform is complex, and kind of Darren was alluding to this, it's simple. So how does an administrator manage this, and who manages all of these policies, and how does that tie in with whether it's the identity group or other folks that are onboarding third-party contractors to assign the right policy? Just kind of trying to play some of those scenarios out so we understand truly how simplistic this could be in an implementation scenario.
Actually, let me add one part to that too. Is there a possibility or a world where we can author our policies external to the system, and then have them in a version controlled repository, and then leverage those via some sort of GitOps to push them into Atmos? Is that a possibility? I'll just extend.
I don't know if it's a possibility today. It's something I've had a discussion with our product team around. I think the question is whether the APIs are built out yet and available for that sort of communication. The ideal world that I have is the ability for somebody to use like a chat ops tool to leverage in, hey, I need to add John Doe to this group. Can it happen? Or even to the point where you could even have an operational side of the aspect of it. So digital experience, it's another feature that we add as part of our platform. And that's an opportunity where we can have some end user service portal where they could go to and ask some questions, hey, why am I being disconnected? Or why is this application slow? And provide that feedback. And that's where we want to go is have more self-service, make it a lot easier. So this isn't administered by, the priests and priestesses that, are the engineering talent in the past that, ran firewalls or routers or switches or whatever it may be, but actually run by an operations team, basically so the operations team can do what they do best, and that's serve the employee. And the engineering talent can do what they do best, and that's help build projects that generate revenue or protect revenue, and not have to do all the break fix and day-to-day KTLO work.
I'm not gonna lie, you had me at chat ops.
I like chat ops.
So do I. All right, so now looking at the architecture itself, I think you're over 380 POPs. Jay, I think you were opening up. You're across multiple cloud providers with those POPs. What from an architecture perspective are you doing to prevent customer downtime? It's a really great architecture, like you said. You don't have the burden of owning your own data centers, which is wonderful. What are you doing to safeguard the downtime of customers? And then as a follow-up to that, how do we protect Atmos, or what are you doing internally to make sure that Atmos itself is not subject to some violation or threat?
Yeah, so both very good questions. We sit on the back of those giants like AWS, GCP, and Azure because we didn't want to go down the route of having own data centers because of that flexibility and the ability to bring up POPs. So we can bring up a POP within an hour. So we quite often look across our kind of user base, and if there's a POP, there's a place where there's more users than POPs, we can bring one up pretty quickly. They can be moved around. The users connect to multiple POPs. So if one goes down, they'll go through the quickest one anyway. So they always pick the fastest route or the least latency route. Obviously, within their own data centers, we install a lightweight connector. So they will go in a redundant setup. So if there's any problems internally, and obviously you want multiple routes into that application, and that's something we work through with the customers and make sure that's possible. But basically, a user at home will connect to the closest edge near them. They'll traverse over those big global backbones of those global providers, obviously reducing that latency. And in a lot of cases, actually, it's quicker than just going out onto the internet. We're actually quicker from point to point because we go on those backbones. So instead of traversing through more hops, we go less hops, less latency, it's quicker. So quite often we do tests, and we're all seen as we provide quicker internet access than without the agent installed, which is quite cool. And sorry, I've forgotten your second question.
Yeah, no. I was just asking, what are you doing to safeguard the platform itself? Because now it is this universal router. It's a focal point. If that was compromised in some way, that would have some pretty interesting effects. What kinds of things are you putting in place to make sure that that platform itself is secure?
John, do you want to take that one?
I guess there's some questions I can answer, and there's some that I can't.
That's fair.
So a lot of it comes down to, we're leveraging AWS and a lot of the protections that they have from a DDoS perspective.
Okay.
Same thing with Oracle and Google and so on and so forth, the cloud giants. So there's that. You also got to consider, the group that is doing the development on this product. A lot of them come from the Unit 8200 out of the Israeli military. That's their equivalent of the NSA. So they're very, and I watch the Slack, channel when something's going on. They're very adept at what they do. They have knowledge that I would never want to have or want to know about. So we've got some really strong, skilled people behind us, protecting us, watching over the systems, the transactions, and also building the Atmos platform as well. So these are top-notch folks.
And to be fair, on a lot of our obviously larger customers, we have to go through things like pen testing and all of those things to sell in. So that's a regular thing. That's an ongoing thing that we do constantly. And that's obviously something that people request. And we actually do it proactively. So we quite often do it so that make sure everything's in place and paperwork, etc., for when people ask for it.
Yeah. So just a theme that's come up today, right, is the simplicity of the platform, visibility of the platform, and overall intelligence and security, right? So, and if we go back to that visibility, and you had highlighted from a maybe competitor standpoint there that this platform is much easier to administer and it has, a simplistic interface. Can you expand upon that single pane concept, single pane of glass in this manner that comes together on Atmos? Like, what does that include exactly?
So all of the SSE elements are all included. So what I mean by that is you can, so let's take a group of users. Let's say you're finance users. You can take that group of users and give them internet access. You can give them access to cloud-based apps. You can give them to on-premise apps, SaaS, etc., all from one line. Mm-hmm. And that can be posture checking as well. You can determine whether they've got a Windows machine, a Mac, what version it is, whether their hard drive's encrypted. I think there's like 25,000 different posture checks we can do. And it's very simple in one line. And we've seen some of our quite large corporate customers have 5 lines in their policy that does all of that.
So it's the policy component. And then is there kind of a monitoring visibility aspect of that that's also associated when we talk about the single pane of saying, okay, here's my policy, here's how it's applied, here's kind of the transactions, if you will, going across so I can see everything in real time?
So one of the real powerful things we do have is we have the ability to actually see the commands people are typing. So if someone, third parties come into SSH or whatever it may be, or Git, you can see what they're doing. So we've got that level of visibility, but then we've got the dashboard that will show things like how many of your users have, say, got CrowdStrike installed and how many don't, how many have got BitLocker encryption turned on or not. And that was something one of our customers requested, and we were like, okay, the data's already there, we'll give it to you. And then we're like, cool, but other people will want that, everyone can have it. Mm-hmm. So that's something that I've not seen before. And obviously, we're not an auditing tool. We're not a tool that you install on-prem that goes out and checks all the software. But whatever information is within that data lake that we can check against, we can give that information. So
and you mentioned,
other than a dashboard.
And since you mentioned the data lake concept quite a few times in terms of having one centralized data lake versus multiple, given everything that comes together in this platform, how can organizations further leverage that? So is that a data lake that's consists of kind of from the access side of within Atmos, and that can feed into an organization's data lake as that they would intake and ingest, and then can have security kind of SOAR operations done on top of whatever they have maybe scheduled in their own organization?
Yeah, so you
Yes.
can output it to the seam of your choice. Sorry, John.
No, I was gonna the same answer. We use we can leverage Splunk easily and send that data off there or whatever seam you want to use. We're also coming out with a product or another feature essentially on the Atmos platform that's called I believe it's Atmos Insights, and will allow you to go in there and you know as a security person go in there and look at that data to understand. Hey, did you know what did Jay do on his trip to Italy? Did he try to get into the system or not get into the system? Did he answer his emails? Because I know he didn't answer his emails. But that sort of getting down into the layers of an understanding is really the advantage there. So there's also another visibility perspective from digital experience. I touched on that earlier. Again, same data lake, just a different persona that that feature is for. That's more for an operations person to understand, you know, where's the slowness on the network? Is it due to the wireless network? Is it due to congestion somewhere within the backbone? Or is it the application is just not performing properly?
And we
So
talked a little bit about automation before. So part of that platform is going to be to notify the user if it's an issue at their end and try and help them kind of help themselves, if that makes sense. So obviously during the pandemic, people are at home and it could be an issue with their home Wi-Fi. Their kids might be playing on the Xbox or whatever it might be. So trying to see where that problem is and trying to be proactive and tell people, maybe try this, maybe try that. And certainly I've used tools like this before, um, and it wasn't that easy to figure out where the problems were. And certainly during the pandemic, you would have your users saying, "There's a problem that the server's down," and it turns out no, it's just everyone's on the Wi-Fi at home watching Netflix or whatever it might be. So bringing in some kind of automation and proactivity, I think across the whole platform is pretty critical, and that's certainly on top of our minds.
yeah, I think it's. I'm still recovering from the idea that there's 25,000 posture checks. The
There's a lot. So I forget
Yeah,
that.
there is.
Is it? I think it's OS Query, isn't it? We use a like a freeware tool, open source tool called OS Query, and we can even do some posture checks agentlessly, as well as
yeah,
obviously a lot more with the agent.
this is where when you start adding it up, like all of this is very significant. Like you said, having observability from the platform itself, especially when people are remote, and being able to tune in on where the troubleshooting events have to happen, is immeasurably powerful. Having the data lake that is open and there's degrees of extensibility is incredibly powerful. The in session visibility that you mentioned before, I think
Yep.
is remarkable. You start adding those things up. Oh, and you can take on some very challenging, historically challenging apps, right? Like VoIP and P2P, et cetera. And I think, John, you mentioned some server initiated communication threads. All of that like lends itself to something that's really magical. What is a traditional, maybe not traditional, what does a common journey look like for somebody that's looking to experiment, looking to introduce this, and maybe even starting to migrate some of their traditional communication pathways over to something like Access? What does that look like?
And maybe if I can just add to that, you know, not folks that are looking for that path, but also folks that have maybe, you know, probably I'll use first generation again, if you will, from a context of if they have an existing SSC or SASE like solution offering, why would they or how would they migrate into Atmos and avail of your feature set?
Okay, so I'll take the first question, and John can take the second one. So the first question is like, where should people start? So let's assume they don't already have a SASE or an SSE platform. Where most people start that are kind of on a legacy VPN, we'll call it, it is with the third-party access. It's an easy use case. It's the highest risk. It takes those untrusted devices and sorry to say, kind of untrusted people, takes them off your network. It removes that kind of risk of them being able to go wherever they like. And if you start with them and give them just user to application access without an agent, you're happy. I mean, that pleases your security team, it pleases everyone. Then the next phase is kind of your enterprise VPN. Start looking at replacing that legacy VPN and treating everyone like they're untrusted and bringing that zero trust concept in for all of those people. And then generally we find when people have done that and they realize the other features we have within the SSE, they start to move away from their old SWIGs and their old CASBs and those other things that they have in place. And obviously, with the way the world is now, with people still being in hybrid mode, and probably even if you're going back to the office some of the time, you're still at home some of the time, you still need that access. And that's kind of the journey they're taking. So kind of third-party contractors, then VPN, and then looking at what else we do, seeing how easy it is to do, because they get that bug of this is cool. We've got really easy to use, less complexity, single data lake policies, quite straightforward. And if we can just add our SWIG stuff into this one policy, why wouldn't we do it? We can remove all that cost from that other vendor and that complexity, or even remove hardware and very simply do it. So I took that one.
Yeah.
John, you.
Yeah, Jay, I think you hit it on the head there. You know, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time, and you got to start somewhere. And we see a lot of folks start with third-party access, or it's VPN replacement. Those are the two main use cases that we've seen. We've also had some developer situations too, where you know, they want to replicate their dev test environments and do it in such a way that in the past, when you know, as a networking person, you never wanted to play with overlapping IP addresses. We don't have that problem, so you can basically create that bubble and you know, do the application replication for your dev test environments and make it in such a way that if you, one of our use cases, a customer of ours has a very massive website that 80% of the revenue is generated through, and they're constantly evolving it and constantly want to test it with various devices. Could be a Chromebook, could be Android, could be, you know, an iPhone type device, but they want to do it in a way that they don't expose the data to the, you know, the general internet. So they leverage us, basically replicate their production environment and then make their changes, and then their QA teams go in there and test it that way. So it's really about finding that use case that you want to start with, and then get used to the product, get used to the new way of doing things, and then looking for more use cases and more use cases until you get to that point where, you know, you got that ZTNA or zero trust everywhere enterprise approach, and that's where we see things going down the road.
Wow. I mean, that you're almost limited by your imagination. I could think of DRE
100%.
scenarios, BCDR scenarios,
Yep.
all sorts of things we could really do that could be kind of cool. Yeah, no shortage of projects that you could get started with then, which is a wonderful part. And I imagine it's a fairly easy thing to stand up. What is a traditional, like what would it look like in terms of investment, resource investment, to really get one of these use cases kind of off the ground? Is that weeks? Is that days? Is that months? What does that kind of look like?
We've come up with some quite clever tools. So we've come up with some tools that help you move away from your current SSE vendor, so we can export policy and import policy. So we've come up with some kind of quick ways of doing that to help people. And we've also got a way of, and some people don't like going down this approach, but we have it available. So we have it available so that you can pretty much configure it as you would a normal VPN and give full access to the network. And then it will monitor what's going on, and it will look at users and the way they're connecting and what they're connecting to. And then you can build your policy around that. Now, there are pros and cons of that. Some people would rather start with a full kind of lockdown because they know that as things go in, it's done and it's finished, because there's a concern that if you leave it open, you never quite close all the doors. So it's either do you have all the doors open and go along and close them one by one, or do you close them when we go and open them? But we have got tools that are able people to do that. We obviously go through a standard proof of value with people to make sure they're getting the value they think they're going to get. And we sit down with them in advance and work out what that value is and what their use cases are. And we work through that. And to be honest, by the time you've gone through that POC or POV, you're very comfortable with a product. You can almost go live anyway. The transition from kind of doing that test to going live, you know how to build policy, you know how the users work, you've got your IDP set up, you've done all the kind of groundwork. It's very easy then to just finalize. I say very easy, depending on your environment.
Yeah. Compelling platform, gentlemen. I want to thank you very much for coming on the show here and enlightening us and hopefully enlightening our our audience and listeners, I should say, and hopefully your users in the future as a result of this would be the ideal outcome. So thanks again very much for coming on the show.
Yeah.
We appreciate the offer to come on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.